All right, so this is our last one of the progressive eras and the DBQs. I know it feels very tedious, but I promise you, after this one, there won't be any for a very, 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 very long time. But today we're going to be looking at regulating morality. So, regulating something basically means that you're deciding what something can and cannot do. Morality is good morals, right? So, if somebody trips and falls and I go and help them pick up their stuff, we would say that I'm a moral person. If that same scenario, if I were to laugh at them, we would consider me somebody with not so good morals. So today we're going to be looking at those regulating morals. And the first thing that we're going to be talking about is African American equality. And a couple of weeks ago, when we were looking at the Reconstruction era, so this is post Civil War, this is really the first time that, slavery has been abolished with the 13th Amendment. Former slaves were given citizenship with the 14th Amendment. And then, of course, you have all men that have the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. But we also know that in America, racism didn't end the second that slavery was abolished. And particularly in the South, a lot of those sort of institutional ways of holding African Americans back were definitely still in place. And with 1896, there's definitely going to be confirmation of that with the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court case. So in 1896, it was ruled that separate but equal is constitutional. Again, meaning that blacks and whites can go to separate restaurants, blacks and whites can go to separate schools, blacks and whites can go to separate railway cars or bus stops or whatever it may be, and that was considered okay. And we definitely know that it wasn't. And so because of that Plessy versus Ferguson case and because Jim Crow laws or segregation laws had now become legal, you're going to have two gentlemen, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who are really going to be pushing for African American equality. And they're going to have different ways of getting there. Booker T. Washington really believed that the only way that African Americans were ever going to be equal is if there was some type of economic advancement, meaning African Americans were going to get jobs and make money, and that if they were able to financially provide for themselves, chances are they would have a better shot at equality. This really comes from that sharecropping method that we saw happen in the South, where former slaves, because they didn't have any skills, they would go back to their former masters and continue to work the land, but they worked it at a very cheap price. And Booker T. Washington saw stuff like that and went, this isn't fair. They need to be paid for what the work that it is that they've done. And so as a result, he's going to create the Tuskegee Institute, and it's a vocational school for African Americans. Vocational school meaning that you're trained to learn a particular skill. So if you were to go to cosmetology school because you want to be an esthetician where you do facials, or you want to be a hairstylist, that is considered a vocational school. And that's what Booker T. Washington wanted to provide, is teach African Americans a certain trade or a certain skill, they'd be able to make money, and that was going to bring them closer to equality than anything else. W.E.B. Du Bois was very different. W.E.B. Du Bois was a really interesting guy. He was the first black person to ever graduate from Harvard, to which he said it was Harvard's pleasure. And he really felt that the only way African Americans were going to achieve equality was through political and government changes. So really kind of, harping on that progressive era idea of we're not going to see changes from individuals, we have to see it from our government. And W.E.B. Du Bois really believed that if there was going to be any equality through African Americans, it was going to have to happen through the law. And so he's going to be the guy who creates the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. NAACP is still around today. And it's because of the NAACP that you're going to get a big push in the 1950s and 60s for civil rights, including Brown versus Board of Education, which was passed in 1954, which officially rules that separate but equal is not constitutional. We've talked a lot about the women. I had focused on the women's suffrage movement last week, but we're also going to look at Comstock laws and Margaret Sanger. So really by the 1920s, a new form of contraception started to come out, and that was birth control. And before this, most women, if they got pregnant, that was it. There really wasn't contraception that necessarily existed. So if a couple didn't want to become pregnant, there really wasn't sort of a way to prevent that from actually happening. It's not until 1960 that the FDA officially approves birth control, but by the 1920s, birth control, that information really started spreading throughout. And a lot of women, not a lot, but there were definitely women who wanted access to that, who maybe just weren't ready to have kids, or they'd already had 5 or 6 kids and they didn't want any more because, well, kids are expensive and they cost a lot of money. There are definitely a lot of misconceptions about birth control. A lot of people think that birth control is just to stop pregnancy or prevent pregnancy from happening. And that is partially true. That's one of the things that they do. But lots of women get prescribed birth control for lots of other reasons. Birth control definitely helps with hormones. So there are some teenage girls who get prescribed birth control simply because they're very hormonal and they have a ton of acne, and birth control helps with that. Some women who don't get regular periods get put on birth control because that helps. And then you also have some women who get prescribed birth control because they develop cysts on their ovaries. If you know anyone that's ever developed a cyst on their ovary, they're incredibly painful to have, and birth control is one of the few things to help with it. A few years ago, under Obamacare, birth control was officially paid for basically any woman that wanted it. And there was one girl, and her name was Sandra Fluke, and she had testified to Congress why she felt that birth control should be paid for as part of a health care plan. And, she talked about the fact that she had had a lot of cysts, and they were very painful for her, and that the birth control was the really only thing that helped with that. But that wasn't really kind of the story that flew. Rush Limbaugh, who's more of a conservative commentator, before she testified, had gone on his radio show and said Sandra Fluke was nothing but a slut and a whore, and she just wants us to pay for her birth control so she can go and sleep around, even though that wasn't the case. But birth control does a lot more than just preventing pregnancy. It actually helps a lot of women with a lot of other issues. And the person that's really going to be leading the way for birth control to get passed is going to be none other than Margaret Sanger. And the reason she actually wanted birth control to be legalized had nothing to do with for helping out women. She actually was a major racist and basically believed that races should only have babies with their own race. So if you were a white man, you should only have a kid with a white woman. That basically there shouldn't be interracial relationships. And so she was initially for birth control getting approved, so that way there wouldn't be interracial relationships or, mixed kids or anything like that. Obviously, that didn't work, but that was her initial plan behind getting birth control officially legalized in the United States. And it's also because of her that Planned Parenthood has been established. And Planned Parenthood, I would say, gets a bad rap for a lot of things in the news because they do perform abortion services. It's about 3% of what they do. But Planned Parenthood does provide a lot of other things, including free contraception, whether it's birth control or condoms. They provide STD testing. They do health screenings for people who don't have health insurance. So I would say they become more well-known for the abortion services that they provide, but they do a lot of other informational release to other people, right? Including, just safe sex, adoption services, things like that. But the main one that we're going to be talking about is prohibition. And when we're talking about prohibition, we are looking at the banning of alcohol. And typically when we talk about the 1920s, it is known as the Prohibition era because it was during the 1920s that alcohol was banned. But even though it was technically banned, we know that alcohol is definitely still going to be going on throughout the country. So the temperance movement also becomes known as the banning of alcohol or the prohibition movement. And the temperance movement was really different than any other movement because it's the only progressive movement that sought to limit freedom and not expand it. So when we look at the women's suffrage movement, the women were looking to get the right to vote so that way all women can vote because technically at the time they weren't able to unless they lived in a state that actually approved voting rights for women. You have the progressives in the working class who, wanted to make sure workers were getting paid more and they had better health conditions and better safety conditions. You had the presidents who wanted to protect the environment and then protect the consumers. And the temperance movement was completely different. They wanted to ban something, prevent people from being able to get something. And it was in this case that it was alcohol. The initial temperance movement was aimed to curb the consumption of alcohol and teach people about the dangers of alcohol because alcohol absolutely can be very dangerous. We know that people drink and drive, which costs a lot of lives, costs a lot of damage. We also know that people can become alcoholics. If they are an alcoholic, they become dependent on alcohol. It could completely ruin their liver. And the only way that you can get a liver transplant as an alcoholic is if you are alcohol-free for 12 months. So if you are an alcoholic who has a bad liver and needs a transplant, unless you can prove that you've been clean for a year, they're not going to give you the transplant because for them, it's basically a waste to give someone who's an alcoholic a clean liver. And then, of course, we know that if people have a really bad alcoholism issues, some of them can develop jaundice, which means that they end up turning yellow. That is definitely a sign of alcoholism. But the temperance movement knew that, having a drink or two, not that big of a deal. But if you're suddenly becoming dependent on alcohol to wake up in the day or even get through the day, that is very dangerous. And they're absolutely correct about that. Eventually, the temperance movement is really going to expand. Instead of this idea of we want to teach people about the dangers of alcohol, they were like, we just need to abolish it altogether. If we just get rid of alcohol, we're going to be able to solve all of the problems in society. That was sort of their ultimate goal. So one of the two main, there's one main group or main woman who really becomes known for the temperance movement. You're going to have the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, or the WCTU. And again, they perceive alcohol as a cause and consequence of larger social problems rather than as a personal weakness or a failing. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, we were talking about, growth and conflict and sort of the problems that were arising as America started to expand west. And one of those was the temperance movement. There are a lot of women who, saw that their husbands, who were supposed to provide for the family, rather than going to church, they were drinking. Rather than spending time with the family, they were drinking alcohol. Rather than spending money to provide food on the table, they're going to the bar and wasting their money there. And so really what they saw happening was alcohol really causing all these problems in their society. And again, they didn't perceive it as an individual weakness. They saw it as, if we just get rid of alcohol altogether, all those problems are going to be gone. Our husbands won't be spending time at the bar. They'll be spending time at home with their family. They'll be spending time, in the church on Sundays. And so therefore, we just have to get rid of alcohol altogether. Carrie Nation, she's also going to become someone who becomes synonymous with the temperance movement. She would basically walk into bars with a hatchet and just start tearing up the bar. And if you look at Carrie Nation here on the left, she's not exactly the most attractive looking woman that you ever see. In the movie Iron Jawed Angels, they're talking about being feminists, and they're like, yeah, when people think of feminists, they think of Carrie Nation, and we're not all crazy like that, because Carrie Nation had sort of become synonymous with the feminist movement of this, kind of more masculine looking woman who would come into bars with a hatchet and completely tear it up. So if you want to remember Carrie Nation, write down this quote that my student Seth Estrada came up with a few years ago: ratchet with the hatchet. That pretty much sums Carrie Nation up altogether. But yeah, she became a very scary sort of force to be reckoned with, especially when looking at the temperance movement. So eventually the Anti-Saloon League is going to develop, and this was a leading organization to lobby for the Prohibition movement. And this, again, is the banning of alcohol in the United States. So really they would do what the women did in Iron Jawed Angels. They would go to parties where they were congressmen. They would talk to them and be like, hey, we should get rid of alcohol. And the reason that you should do this is because, it's bad for society and blah, blah, blah. This was very strongly supported by the church, and eventually it's going to lead to the passing of the 18th Amendment in 1920. Now, obviously, we know that this isn't going to last long, and you're going to have a lot of people who are going to make a lot of money in the 1920s by selling alcohol illegally. The most famous of all of them is probably Al Capone. And Al Capone never got caught for selling alcohol illegally. He got caught for tax evasion. If you ever want a really good show to look at that deals with the Prohibition era in the 1920s and the fact that people were still selling alcohol illegally, check out the show Boardwalk Empire. It came out on HBO, I want to say about 10 years ago. It stars Steve Buscemi, but it's a really fantastic show that takes a very in-depth look at the Prohibition movement and how all these really famous gangsters were making their money by selling alcohol illegally. People obviously found their way around the 18th Amendment. Just because alcohol was officially banned, it didn't mean that people stopped drinking. You would get what's called secret underground bars, and I can't think of the name right now. I normally don't do this. Speakeasies. That's essentially what they were called. So basically, like a speakeasy was basically like an underground bar where people would go to drink alcohol, and they were very secret establishments where you had to wear certain clothes. You would have to do like certain knocks, but they were basically Prohibition style bars where they wouldn't let more than 35 people like in at a time. There was a certain time limit that people could actually be in these places. And again, the reason being for it was because, they didn't want to get caught, because if they got caught, it would be very, very dangerous. There's actually a really traditional, like, kind of speakeasy bar over in Anaheim called the Blind Rabbit, and it's really cool because it's done Prohibition style, and it's in the Anaheim Packing District. But there's basically like this wall of barrels, and they open up the wall, you walk in, and then there's a bar, and then you can only be in there for a certain amount of time. And then to leave, you would pull this book on a bookcase, and you exit that way. But unless you know the restaurant's there, you wouldn't know it was there. And that was really the whole point of like the speakeasies, was that they were a secret place where people could to get together and they could still drink. 18th Amendment's only going to last for about 14 years, and then with the 21st Amendment that gets passed in the 1930s, people can officially drink alcohol once again. And then, of course, we know that the drinking age in the United States is 21, whereas I would say most places throughout the world it's 18. So why exactly is the drinking age 21? Well, this has to do with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And they were a lobbyist group back in the 1980s who basically kind of saw a lot of DUIs and drunk driving accidents happening, and decided to do something about it. And they decided that they wanted to lobby President Ronald Reagan at the time to change the drinking age from basically permanently throughout the United States to 21. And he was basically able to get the states on board. And even though the drinking age throughout all the United States is 21, different states have different ways of dealing with alcohol laws. So like in California, alcohol can be sold anytime between 6 a.m. and 2 a.m. So from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., you can't buy alcohol. When I used to work at Albertsons, there was a lady who came in like at 5-something in the morning to get a thing of vodka, and I kept trying to ring her up, and it wouldn't scan, and I couldn't figure it out. And finally, I realized it was because it was before 6 a.m. So I had to literally wait till 6 a.m. to go ahead and scan the bottle of vodka for her to buy. In Texas, they have rules like you can buy beer and wine at a grocery store, but if you want liquor, you have to go to a liquor store. You have some states where you can't buy alcohol on Sundays, or you can only buy the alcohol between certain time periods. In Tennessee, where Jack Daniels, the whiskey, is produced, they're in a dry county. So even though you could buy alcohol there, you technically can't drink it. So even though the 21st Amendment has given everybody the ability to drink alcohol when they turn 21, different states have different ways of dealing with it.